Okay, so this is actually part two or three. I don't even know which part we're holding on eating. You should eat nicely. Proper way of eating. Your food shouldn't become repulsive. I was actually just reminded today that you see by Polisher Chassidim from Poland. So there's Russian Chassidim. There aren't very many left. A lot of them became communists, and then who knows what happened to them? They came to America. They also, um, which chilled out, I guess you could say, in the 1940s, 30s, 20s. But the Polish Chassidim, which really didn't come, mainly came after the war, or right before the war, World War II. We're speaking of. They're the ones with the curly payas, the big hats, the fur hats. Those are mainly the Polish Chassidim. That's mainly of the Chassidim. Main Chassidic people, Hasidic Jews, are from Poland. You'll see that when they eat pretty proper, and it's because they follow Shulchan Aruch. For whatever reason, the Russian Hasidim, they also do, but they also don't. Obviously, with Polish Hasidim, they also do and also don't. But you'll see they sit up straight. They bring the food to their mouth. They don't hunch over, which is not in this chapter about hunching over to eat. We don't really hunch over to eat. There's certain situations, certain types of foods that we do, but it's very aristocratic, and you should be very careful to not make your food look disgusting. And that's mainly what this part. That's what this chapter is talking about, chapter 42. So just to continue on, we said earlier you shouldn't wash your hands with wine and other types of liquids. In other words, something that people are going to drink, it looks gross that you're going to wash your hands with it. So let's just continue on. So now there are going to be some exceptions to the rule where the food will look disgusting or degrading, but it's okay. It's for the benefit for other reasons. We also said about bread. You don't just toss bread. There's two reasons why you don't just toss bread. You don't throw bread in the trash. One is it's degrading to the bread, and the Gemara says something else, that it causes poverty. So it causes one to become impoverished. So that's why we break up the bread for the birds. Now, normally you're not allowed to break up bread because it makes a bunch of crumbs, and that's I guess it looks gross. So that's what we said. You should when you eat bread, you should just take a piece and eat it at a time. So you leave it whole and you piece from it. Nowadays, I don't think it's so. People are not what we call makpid. They're not very careful, or they're not worried about the way it looks. We tear up bread and we have pieces of bread, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, that's basically what we spoke about last week, and let's just move on. We'll probably finish the chapter. Shouldn't say finish. We'll probably get to the end of the chapter. If you have no medicine, I'll just read it in English. You have no medicine from bread. Okay, so if you have to make medicine from bread or from any other food, even though the food becomes repulsive, it's permitted, obviously, because a person's life takes precedence over everything else. Oh my, sorry. Okay, well, this is a little bit of what we did last week. Careful not to throw crumbs away because it may cause poverty. Gather them and feed them to the birds. Okay, so you make sure that you should crumple up the bread and give them to the birds. So if you have leftover challah after Shabbos, this is what you do. And I told you every Sunday I would walk home when I was living in Brooklyn, and there would be hundreds of pieces of bread in an empty lot, which is near where I lived, which looked disgusting, and there were a gajillion pigeons eating the bread. It was gross. When you drink water, you should not drink in the presence of others. Now, you don't want, usually when you drink water, you're thirsty. You should only really drink water when you are. You know what an interesting halacha? Let me tell you an interesting halacha. You don't make a bracha on water. You don't make a blessing before water unless you're thirsty. So if you're not thirsty, you do not, and you're just drinking it for refuah, for health reasons, yeah, you should try to drink 8 glasses of water a day or whatever it says. I don't know. Obviously, I don't do it. Torah does speak about that. You should drink water. It's healthy for the body. You don't make a blessing. The reason is because there's no flavor, there's no pleasure in the water itself, or added pleasure from flavor. So you don't make a blessing. You'll see Rabbi Silverberg here. He drinks water. He doesn't make a blessing. unless he's thirsty. Now, typically we only drink water when you are thirsty, and then for when you're drinking it, you're like, if you're like my kids, yeah, they drink the water, and at the end they go, because they were holding their breath the whole time because they were so thirsty. We were trying to swallow as much water as possible. One second. Okay. So, you should turn to the side. You shouldn't let someone really look at you. Now, if everyone's drinking water, you're playing sports, it doesn't look degrading. But if you're just drinking water, you should try to. We do what's called bahatnei leches. We do things in a modest way. We try to do things in a modest way. So if you're very thirsty, it might just be a good idea to, hide yourself slightly wherever you can.
What about during a meal?
Oh, so we're gonna say you shouldn't be looking at somebody while they drink and while they eat.
Does that mean you don't have to turn your face away when you
Yeah,
drink
so
water?
typically in a meal, it talks about you're not necessarily drinking water. And the Torah always associates like wine or a special beverage, in which case you don't have to turn your face with a special beverage.
Is seltzer special enough?
It's special to me and my family, that's for sure.
Yeah, me too.
It's the drink of choice. I would assume. Well, I would think, but Poil. I mean, in actuality, and I've been to many homes of prominent rabbanim, prominent rabbis. I've never seen them turn their face. Like I've never actually seen them do it, but they do drink quietly, and they don't speak when they're talking. They don't touch their food. They're kind of actually moved away from their table a little bit. To answer your question, you see in actuality. I remember when I was in yeshiva, I asked one of the rabbis there, who's a rav. This was in Brooklyn. I asked him, like I would ask him halachic questions in halacha and Jewish law, and he would say, "Okay, but Poil, in actuality, you don't see people do it like that." So he would never say yes or no, but he would say, "Whatever, we don't see people doing it like that." If you pressed him and you say, "Well, what's the answer?" then he would give you the answer. But you learn to just take the first answer. So I'm just telling you, but Poil, you don't really see people turning their face. You just don't want to look slobbery and disgusting. That's the idea. Okay. Do not stare at someone while they're eating or drinking. Yeah.
Hey, so water is not the way it used to be. Water is like a common drink now. They sell it in bottled water. So you see, it's like an end thing. Everybody's drinking water. So
I drink out of a tap.
Difference?
But it's a good question. Yeah, water is definitely much more. Water is expensive. If you want to buy Voss, certainly.
Got to go to Costco.
Costco, yeah. Go to Costco.
Yeah.
Not if you go to Costco.
Hills. Kosher. The water's kosher.
Yeah, I don't know why the water's kosher. It's a way to make money. Yeah, do not stare. Okay, I don't know. It's a good question. But in actuality, people aren't disgusted by looking. It is a little bit inappropriate to look at somebody while they're drinking. I mean, while they're eating and while they're drinking, especially if you have a beard and little droplets always on my mustache, I get little droplets and I got to do like my kids. I got to go like this, or take a what's it called? A towel and do it down. Well, there's always a little something that gets a little remnants that I say for later. So I have to, shouldn't look at somebody while they eat and drink. It's the bottom line. And I should do my part to kind of like hide my face a little bit. But then it makes the other person uncomfortable. If they see that I'm kind of like turning my face, it's a vicious cycle. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, so don't look at somebody while they eat and drink. That's for sure. And we spoke about not talking while eating before. We talked about not saying brachas out loud. That is a common thing. Do not say a bracha out loud if everyone's eating very loudly. You don't necessarily want them to say amen because they'll end up talking, saying amen while they have food in their mouth, and there's a big severity when you don't say amen to something that blesses Hashem. Yeah, whatever. Amen is like a serious thing. When to say amen, how to say amen. We spoke about it actually way back when, maybe a year ago, in the early chapters of Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. You shouldn't say amen too loud. You should say amen. This is a little bit on a tangent. Whatever. You shouldn't say amen too loud. I guess unless you're in a Sephardi shul, they say amen very loud. They also daven. They also pray very loud. You should say amen at the same tone and the same pace as the person saying the blessing. Okay, we'll talk about that at a different time. Maybe on our second go around. Some of the food or drink which has a good aroma. Now, this is with regards to if you have waiters and waitresses, servers. Some of the food or drink which has a good aroma and creates a desire must be given to the waiter before it is served to others, because it can be harmful for them to see food, desire it, and then not be able to eat it. Good life hack: if you're going to go to eat somewhere, you're going to go to someone's house and there's like a party, whatever, eat before you go. Eat a little bit so you won't be so hungry when you get there. In this case, this is the same halacha, along the same lines. It's the same halacha as if you have workers, picking. We had this before, picking grapes for you, or working in your vineyards or your farm. They're allowed to eat. Now, they actually have laws of what they can eat and what they can't eat. But for the most part, if they're picking fruits for you, fruit pickers, yeah, if that's their job. I forgot the word. If somebody knows, let me know. I feel like Bella would know the answer to this, or Ari. They are allowed to eat the food. They can eat as much food as they want as they're working. So the same thing over here. Okay, don't serve food to anyone unless you know he will wash his hands and recite the bracha. Now, which means we're talking about the ritual washing of the hands. Now, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who is the leading posek, he's the leading halachic authority, he's the leading person who understands law. He lives in Yerushalayim. He says this is not so clear. Nowadays, we have what's called everyone, for the most part, not everyone. People who are what we call tinuk shenishba, people who did not grow up religious, meaning they didn't grow up knowing the right answer. They didn't grow up knowing what to do in Judaism. So if you're inviting them to your house to make them come closer to befriend them, make them come closer to Judaism, you don't want to scare them away, right? The Rebbe was very much against those Jews that would stand in the streets of Jerusalem and yell, or in Eretz Yisrael in Israel, and yell at those Jews that were driving on Shabbos. He says, you're just making a fool of yourself and you're just pushing them away. You're separating yourself. It has to be done with love. And even if a person knows they shouldn't do it, it doesn't really sink in, yeah? Like a doctor who's overweight and smokes. Of course he knows he shouldn't be smoking and he's over. But whatever, it hasn't really sunk in. I do that all the time. I have stuff like there's plenty of things that I do that I know I shouldn't be doing, yet I still do them. So same thing over here. This halacha is like a little bit, I think it's changed. He says it's changed a little bit for this generation, even though the person will not wash their hands. They're not going to necessarily wash their hands before they eat the meal. You don't push them. You don't push them to do it, and you should still serve them food. He explains that, I don't know if he explains, but he talks about they're eating kosher food and whatever. It's also a midrabanan, it's from the rabbis, washing of the hands before it, which is not to be taken lightly. Even those laws which are enacted by the rabbis, Torah says most of the time we're much more stringent about that. We don't want the rabbis' takanot, their decrees, to seem light in the eyes of the people. But in this case, we're not trying to make them light in the eyes of the people. We're finding an exception to the rule for the sake of bringing the Jewish people closer. Now, we're not breaking any laws. We're not being them over in the Torah like they did, like the conservative shuls did in the 1950s. They thought, okay, we should allow Jews to drive on Shabbos because they'll come to shul at least. No, that's actually like against so much, and we know that's just not helped the situation at all. It's made the situation much worse. Over here, we're not breaking any mitzvahs. We're just a rabbi's decree is it's movable, it's malleable. Okay, now this is talking about something provocative, or could seem provocative, which actually fits with this week's parsha, which I'll add at the end. A woman whose husband is not present should not drink wine, and if she is away from home, even if her husband is with her, she's forbidden to drink wine. The same applies. No, we don't follow this, right? I'll tell you in a second. The same applies to other intoxicating drinks. However, if she's accustomed to drink wine in the presence of her husband, She may drink a little, even if in her husband's absence. Now, nowadays, it's understood and it's accepted that women drink wine. That's the majority thing. Now, back in the day, I think women wouldn't drink wine. The wine was very strong, and they would become very vulnerable. It was a much more barbaric world back then, and it could be provocative, yeah, and it's enticing, and men have an animalistic side, especially back then, and it was inappropriate. But a woman who can hold her drink, so to speak, it's okay. And nowadays, women can hold their drink. I think that's from what I was. So I just want to. How does it tie to this week's parsha? Well, it's about walking discreetly. It's about being not provocative, and it's about acting proper. Now, at the end of this week's parsha, hopefully we'll have our weekly roundup tomorrow. At the end of this week's parsha, talks about the building of the tabernacle or the holy temple, and it says going to the mizbeach. Yeah, the mizbeach was the big bonfire where we would throw the animals. So it was a huge platform. It wasn't gigantic, but it was very big. You can imagine how big it is. We had to throw a lot of animals on there after, to roast them and then eat them. It says it has to be a ramp going up. It can't be steps going up to the ramp. So to the mizbeach, to the altar, whatever the altar. Why does it have to be a ramp? Because it shouldn't. When you take a step, the stones will be embarrassed to see your nakedness. You're not allowed to show your nakedness. What does that mean? What do you mean show your nakedness? Well, first of all, stones don't really have feelings, do they? And you might think that the Kohanim didn't wear pants. Yeah, the priests who did this service didn't wear pants. They did wear pants. They wore long tunics that went all the way down, but they had pants. They had underwear on. Yeah, long underwear actually. So what does it mean to expose your nakedness? There's something provocative about it. And it's not that the stones would see your nakedness. We're not so concerned, although it is connected to holiness. And anything connected to holiness, we do not act inappropriate in front of. It says about a mezuzah. There's laws of how to act in front of a mezuzah, if you guys know that. If there's certain books in the room, Sfarim, there's a certain way you have to act, a certain way you have to sit. Perhaps we'll get to that. Who would be embarrassed? The Kohanim that were walking up those stones, yeah? They would walk behind you and in front of you. There was just something about like when the tunic, yeah, if you walk on a step, the tunic, the long shirt would flow up and down. And there was a very spiritually sensitive time that they had to stay somewhat removed from Gashmias or any inappropriate thought. And we're very sensitive, especially in the Beis HaMikdash, to not do anything provocative, even seemingly provocative, nothing would actually happen. We move far away from it. Now that's talking specifically about the temple. Okay. Guests must not take anything from the food served them and give it to their son and daughter of the host. So if there's food in front of you and you have the host's kid is sitting next to you, we don't follow this, and it's going to say why, but you don't just take from your own plate and give it to the kid. Be like, oh, let me feed you. No. For it may be that the host has no other food than that which has been set before them, and will be embarrassed if the guests will not have enough. Yeah? So if I take my food and I give it to a little Yassel Puchnik sitting next to me, and then I'll be like, oh, I gave your son some food. Do you mind if I just get a little bit more? There might not be anything left, and therefore you will embarrass your host. Don't do that. But if there's an abundance of food at the table, it is permissible. Once again, which is the majority rule nowadays. People won't really invite you over if they don't have enough food, unless you're really good friends. I want to just say something. What did I want to say? I already forgot. When you're passing food, you take for yourself first. Right? You guys know that? We spoke about that last time. If you're at a Shabbos table and they cut challah and they're giving out challah, you take before you pass on to the next person. If they're giving you soup, you take the soup, you put it down right away. You take the soup right away. Don't keep passing the soup around so that by the time that soup makes it to the person, the last person, it's going to be cold. The host will be upset. You take your food right away. Usually eat right away as well, by the way. Just to mention. You don't have to wait for the host who's cutting the challah to start eating before you start eating. But I did mention, and this is important to say, fish should be given to the host first. Usually the gefilte fish or whatever kind of fish you have, he gets offered first. You should have the fish first. And the fish is usually served cold anyway. Okay, when you enter a home, do not say, "Give me something to eat." That would raise some eyebrows. But you should wait until it is offered. It's forbidden to partake of a meal which is not sufficient for the hosts, even if the host invites you to eat with him, because this borders on robbery. Unless obviously he's giving it to you. There's a serious sin. It's a category of sins for which repentance is very difficult. Interesting. Let me just see that lashon over there. Shekasha lashav aleihim. Interesting. Okay. I don't remember that last part. Okay, now this is going to talk about interesting halacha. When you make a bracha in a room over some food, the idea is that you're going to be in that place, in that room. So the question is, like, what if I start walking around? What if I get up from my place and I go sit in another room, maybe on the other side of the house? Do I have to make another bracha? Sometimes yes. Sometimes you really do. You're really the bracha is connected. The blessing over the food is connected to that room, unless you had in mind that I'm going to take it anywhere. It rests. A blessing rests down. Bracha, a blessing comes to the word to draw down, right? Brecha, to draw down. Mavrich, to bend down, and it bends down and it rests on that food in a specific sense, but in a general sense, it rests in the room. Now, if you're going to go to another room and you want to continue eating your cracker, there's a good chance that you have to make another blessing. And what's the problem? We are very careful to not be careless about blessings. Saying God's name in vain is a big problem. It's one of the 10 commandments. And therefore, we try to minimize any problem. So we don't try to say unnecessary blessings. And in a place of doubt, whether I said a blessing on something or not, we do without. In a place of doubt, you do without. We don't say the blessing again. However, unless you had in mind. So here it's talking about Birkat HaMazon. Now, what's interesting about Birkat HaMazon, there's an exception to Birkat HaMazon. Because it's like this whole generalization, it's kind of like a general Birkat HaMazon. What is Birkat HaMazon? You have bread. Yeah, you wash your hands before bread, on the Tilat Yadayim. Then you have your meal, you have bread. Now, any food that comes to the table, you don't have to make a separate blessing on, right? So if you have bread and then fish comes and the meat comes and then the salads and all these, you don't make a separate blessing unless it's dessert, which we spoke about earlier, because dessert is not really part of the meal. It's something extra. That's the whole idea of dessert. So it makes its own blessing. However, you see how it's like an all-encompassing, when you have bread, it's all-encompassing. And therefore, the blessing, the after blessing, which is from the Torah, the after blessing is also all-encompassing. You don't say specifically, thank you for my chicken, and thank you for my fish, and thank you for my, you make an all-encompassing blessing. Because it has the spirit of being all-encompassing, there's a great doubt whether if you go to another room, you should make a separate blessing, because you're still within this like all-encompassing space when you have the bread. And therefore, without getting into the details, you don't make a separate blessing. If you find yourself eating in another room, you don't make a separate blessing in that room, unless, once again, it's dessert. Now, when it comes to other types of foods, it's a big problem. You shouldn't do that. Now, if you are, this is very common, especially if you're in a shul that has a kiddush, and then you're going to go eat at someone else's house, or you're going to go eat at your own home. Now, if you come to our shul, for example, they serve challah at our shul. They serve like a whole meal. You don't need to go eat at home. But if you do, sometimes we do, actually very rarely, we did. Instead of washing a second time at home, this is what I do. I'll wash for bread. I'll eat my bread at shul. I'll sit down. I'll shmooze. Oh, sorry. Before I wash my hands for bread, I have in mind, I'm going to continue my meal in my house. Now, you have to have at least a kazayas of bread in your house. A kazayas is about 6 to 7 ounces of bread. Not that much. Not such a big deal. Before you wash your hands, you have to have in mind, just have in mind, like, there's a possibility I'm going to go home. So I'm also having in mind that I'm going to continue my meal at home. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I'm having in mind that I will. Then I can sit down, eat, da, da, da. Then I go home. Now you got about 60 minutes to make sure you get to your house and start eating. Otherwise, you run into a problem, which we won't talk about here. And then you continue your meal. So I'll have to go home and I have to eat a kazayas of bread, about 6 to 7 ounces of bread. If I didn't, I really should bench. I should make an after blessing. So let's say I didn't have in mind, and I get home and I'm like, you know what? I don't think I had it in mind. What should I do? You should bench. You should bless from what you had before, and then you should wash again. That's pretty much what you should do. Yeah, it's a little bit too much. That's not a lot. Okay, let's just do.
Question.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have bread. I mean, you have a meal. You have bread. Let's weekday. So you have bread. You have a meal, and you have dessert.
Yeah.
So at the end, you say Bokar Hamazon, and
Yeah.
then you incorporate the blessing after the meals too. I forgot what you call it.
Yeah, the bracha achron. Yeah. So just to answer your question, let's say I have dessert. This is what I do. This is a very practical example. You go, you have your meal, and then you have dessert at the end of your. Oh, you're saying in a regular day, a regular weekday?
Yes.
It's the same thing. It applies weekday and Shabbos. So it's the same thing. If you if you wash for bread and you eat bread, and then you have dessert, you make a separate blessing for the dessert, right? So if you had a cookie,
right.
So you make a Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam borei minei mazonos. Yeah. Then you make the regular Birkat Hamazon. You don't make the special blessing for cookies and other types of wheat.
Okay.
Now, interestingly enough, let me just mention something. There are those that are very careful, and I do try to be, but sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. That you should actually bless the Birkat before you have dessert. Do the Birkat Hamazon. The Birkat Hamazon is the blessing that we say after you've had bread. You should actually say Birkat Hamazon. This is the best way to do it. You should Birkat Hamazon, and then bring out the dessert and eat the dessert, and then you make a Borei Minei Mazonot, and you make the special blessing for after the cake or the cookies or whatever. That's actually the most ideal way to do it.
Yeah, that's the way my son does it when he came back from Sfat.
Yeah,
that's the way he does it. And I was like, wait a minute. I thought everything was incorporated in the Bokar Hamazon.
Yeah, it's slipping my mind. It is. If you eat it within the meal, then it's fine. You can make it because, but the best way to do it is a big question. Dessert is a whole question. Like, is it part of the meal? Is it not part of the meal? Should it be included in the Birkat Hamazon or not? And those that are careful, not all, but there are those that are very careful to actually, to make the Birkat Hamazon and then serve dessert and have its own separate thing, which I prefer to do for many reasons. Number one, because halachically, it's according to Jewish law, it's much better to do it that way. And number two, I actually enjoy the meal much better. I bench. I say the Birkat Hamazon while I'm like still awake. Once I have dessert, I'm like like so full, and I'm like ready to take a nap. So I do a much better job.
I was actually laughing at that one. That was good.
Doing my belt. I don't wear belt. I wear suspenders.
So, I know that a lot of Sephardim actually, the observant ones that I have met, they do that this way. They actually do the Birkat Hamazon after they finish eating all the bread and main meal course, and then for dessert they make a separate blessing and bracha acharona.
Okay.
But question. So I'm a little confused. Sorry, Rabbi, I'm also driving. That's why. Did you say that if you do your blessing over bread in shul, do you have to make another separate blessing at home as well? You said, or you have to bench out at shul and then come and do a new blessing?
If you so what I said was, if you know you're going to eat back at home, continue your meal. So before you wash your hands for the bread, you have in mind that I'm going to continue my meal at home. If you didn't do that, if you did not have in mind that you would continue your meal at home, then you should ask the rabbi that's closest to you what you should do and what is it that we do in this community.
Yeah.
And the best thing to do is to is to bench. It's a big problem. So you should make the Birkat
Yeah.
Hamazon and then go ahead and wash again at home if you want to.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I have been doing mostly. All right.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you. All
Yeah.
right.
So, okay, perfect. Now let me just say this last thing. If you fall asleep during the meal, it's a big problem. It's considered an interruption, depending on how long you slept. Let's read it really quickly, and then we'll end here. If you're interrupting the meal to pray, which is a big problem, shouldn't do that, but that happens. So, yeah, when does that typically happen? If in the winter months, in Chabad at least, the winter months, you have a big kiddush, and then there's a big fabrengen. Yeah, we sit down, we fabrengen, and then it comes time to mincha. You realize Shabbos is over in about 45 minutes, and we have to daven mincha. There's not enough time to make the Birkat Hamazon and then go daven mincha. So you stop, and then you should go daven mincha. I've been in that situation. If you interrupt them many times, if you interrupt the meal to pray, when you resume eating, you do not have to repeat the hamotzi, because there's going to be a good break, probably, 40 minutes, 30 minutes. Similarly, if you fall asleep during the meal for a short nap, even though it was prolonged for a while, it's not considered an interruption. At least according to the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, okay? Similarly, if you interrupted for other personal needs, like you have to go to the bathroom, then it's okay, no problem. You don't have to you don't have to worry about that. You have to make it to Birkat Hamazon and then wash again. Nevertheless, in the latter situation, if you go to the bathroom, your hands must be washed again because of the distraction, unless you guarded your hand from uncleanliness. Okay, so this is okay. We don't do this though. Even though you wash your hands again, you do not recite the bracha on this washing. No, you got to wash your hands. But don't make al netilas yadayim, because when you're washing on account of distraction, you do not recite another bracha. Okay, this is very important to know. This is very important to know. My wife actually reminded me of this Friday night. If you wash your hand, we wash your hands for bread before bread. You're not allowed to talk, right? You're not allowed to talk until you have the bread in your mouth, because it's all part of one act. We talked about it way earlier. What if you did talk, usually by accident? It's happened to all of us multiple times. You go back and wash your hands without saying the bracha al netilat yadayim. Don't say the bracha al netilat yadayim. And you should still be quiet, by the way. You should wash your hands, and then just walk to get the bread, but don't talk. Okay, and this is a very important thing. Once you've decided in your mind to bench, to make it the Birkat Hamazon, your meal is over. Once you've decided if you're going back and forth, should I stop? Should I not stop? But if you're what's called machlit, if you resolve within yourself that I am done eating, you're not supposed to eat more. You have to bench. You have to make the Birkat Hamazon. Yeah, that's with any food. Interestingly enough, if you quickly in your mind you're like, you know what, I'm not done, then that's fine. But if as soon as you resolve like I'm done, even though you didn't verbally say anything, if you decide within yourself, I'm done, you're done. Should be careful with that. Okay, that's it. Sorry, we went a little over. If you have any questions, just text me, obviously.
Just the last thing to mention. For example, sometimes when you have a lot of guests, and not every guest is going to be mindful of Birkat Hamazon, because sometimes you forget. But if you do forget, it's allowed to say still Birkat Hamazon as long as you're full, right? As long as you're still full.
Within 72 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Full and within 72 minutes, or just within 72 minutes, even if you're not full anymore.
Right. Okay.
It happens all the time.
Thank you.
Yes, and those guests that don't know about Birkat Hamazon and anything like that, those are the best guests to invite, by the way.
All right.
All right, everybody. There should be class. Oh no, Rabbi Perry's wife had a baby. I don't think he's gonna have a class tonight. But I'm trying to get Rabbi David Burke to give a class. He might do it. So, hopefully there will be a class tonight. But
can you do a shir on just like dessert?
Me on just dessert?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to prepare that.
And call it just desserts.
If I do it, I will call it just.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll have to find out where to look that up. Okay, everybody, enjoy the rest of the day.
Peace.
Thank you.
Yeah. No problem.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Oh, I thought I stopped recording here. What do I do? And